David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to follow on from what Grant Robertson was just arguing, and that's something that student associations have mentioned to me in a number of meetings I've had with the student associations over the last few weeks. That they are concerned about the transition arrangements that are going to take place as a result of this bill coming into force. It looks like, unfortunately, it will. We have tried as best we can to argue against that, to debate that. We've met with both the National Party and Heather Roy herself to look at a compromise alternative that might have actually been able to get through, that could have in fact enabled this piece of legislation to get through with an opt-out clause. An opt-out clause that would mean that students that were signed up to it in the first 1 month of signing up would be able to get out of the student association fees pretty much as we currently do with KiwiSaver. We believe, and the student associations do as well, because they announced it in the press release just a few weeks ago, that in fact this enabled us to do both. I mean, those with a pathological dislike of student associations who didn't want to be part of it could get out of it. Yet it would not undermine and gut, as we know has happened in every other jurisdiction where student associations have legislation has done the same thing to student associations in those places where it's actually meant the student association is undermined. That unfortunately, that compromise and those discussions collapsed when ACT realised that they could possibly get it through before the end of the year. And I think that's a real shame, because I think what we would have had was a piece of legislation that actually had some durability, that could have continued on and not been a sort of a legislative ping pong between sort of different governments as they've come and gone out of power. That said, Mr. Chair, I do think there are some real issues around the transition arrangements mentioned in Clause 9. And there's one thing that I wouldn't mind some elucidation on, and that is that as we all know, many students will join an organisation or an institution halfway through the year. With the semester system, it's not always at the beginning of the year that people join. And if somebody was joining halfway through the year under the current regime, and suddenly on the 1st of January they shifted to a different regime, according to this legislation, as I understand it anyway, those people would stay part of the student association, having paid their full entitlement for the course of a year. Would they, this is the question, Mr. Chair, should they be eligible for a pro rata refund should they want to opt out of being a student and part of that student association if they decided that they didn't want to be part of the student association? And I think that's a pretty legitimate question. I'm not sure if that's completely covered in that transitional arrangement, but it would be one of the questions that would arise, I think, should this pass in on the 1st of January of 2012. So there's a number of transitional arrangements that Clause 9 alludes to, but perhaps doesn't fully cover as a result of the way it's written in the legislation at the moment. The second point regarding Clause 9 that I want to raise, Mr. Chair, is the implications of Education Amendment Bill number 4. Because as we have seen, and that was passed into law a few weeks ago, as we know, student associations will be having to, as part of that legislation, be sitting down with universities to look at any increase in levies. And I would submit that if this bill does go through, and it does go through in the 1st of January 2012, that there will be a number of student associations which will basically fall over, and some of the services that those student associations are currently providing will not be able to continue to exist simply because the finances for those services be they counselling or medical or sporting or... Mr Chair? Mr Chair?
Sue Kedgley.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Well, look, the Green